Deals, diplomacy, and the rise of Gulf nations on the world stage. Trillions of dollars were pledged during the U.S. president's three-nation tour of the Gulf this week. So, is this the golden age of the Middle East? And has Donald Trump taken U.S. Gulf relations to a new era? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. After a 4-day blitz through Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, U.S. President Donald Trump returns to the White House with billions in investments and a shift in alliances. The U.S. is preparing to lift decades-long sanctions on Syria and could be close to a nuclear deal with Iran. Previous presidents might have been expected to make a stop in Egypt, Jordan, or Israel. But notably, Trump's deal-making tour did not include those countries. So, are the Gulf nations now in sync with the U.S. on some of the biggest challenges in the region? And is Trump reshaping the Middle East, or is it the Gulf states that will dictate future U.S. foreign policy? We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Barbara Angopa.
A warm welcome as U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in the United Arab Emirates on the final leg of his Gulf tour. Trump says his regional visit has raised nearly $4 trillion. The UAE president says the deals will be mutually beneficial.
This partnership has taken a significant and unprecedented leap forward, especially since you assumed office, particularly in the areas of the new economy, energy, advanced technology, artificial intelligence, and industry.
In Qatar, Trump signed economic and defense deals totaling nearly $250 billion. Trump insists his focus is bringing back manufacturing to the U.S.
I want it all made in the USA. The days of making our parts all over the world because we have wonderful partners. No, it's America first now.
The Gulf states are looking to use their deepening economic and defense ties with the U.S. to ease regional crises. Qatar's emir called on Trump to find a solution for the genocide in Gaza.
Qatar brings the channels, the access and the credibility. The United States brings power, leverage and global weight. If we act together, we have a real shot at ending the bloodshed and restoring regional confidence.
Earlier at the Gulf Cooperation Council summit in Riyadh, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called on Trump to build on Arab diplomacy.
We seek with you, Mr. President, in cooperation with our brothers in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, to de-escalate tensions in the region, end the war in Gaza, and find a permanent and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian cause, in accordance with the Arab Peace Initiative and relevant Arab resolutions.
During his regional tour, Trump announced the lifting of sanctions on Syria and held talks with its new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa. And in the last month, U.S. entered talks with Iran and recently made a pact with Yemen's Houthis. But there were no stopovers in Israel, Egypt or Jordan, the U.S.'s traditional regional allies, perhaps signaling a shift towards Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates as the U.S.'s most prominent Middle East partners. Barbara Angopa for Inside Story.
Let's now bring in our guest. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Giorgio Cafiero, CEO at Gulf State Analytics, a geopolitical risk consultancy. In Doha, Hassan Barari, who's a professor of international affairs at Qatar University. And from Tel Aviv, Alon Pinkas, a former Israeli ambassador and consul general in New York, and a columnist at The Independent. Thanks for joining us on Inside Story. Giorgio, is this a new phase in the relationship between the U.S. and the Gulf countries, or how would you describe it?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the Trump administration is very determined to bring America's relationships with these three GCC countries to new heights. I do think that there is sort of a new phase in these bilateral relationships that we're witnessing right now. There are a set of goals that President Trump has, both in terms of the economic dimensions of the America First, Make America Great Again agenda, getting these massive investment and trade, defense deals secured. At the same time, I think the administration is trying to limit America's military entanglements in the Middle East, sort of shift focus in U.S. foreign policy toward countering a rising China. U.S., at least this administration, is trying to sort of wind down certain conflicts, find some diplomatic resolutions to regional crises that involve the United States. And the GCC countries are playing a very critical role in terms of helping the White House move toward achieving these goals. So yes, I mean, I think the answer to your question is absolutely. We're entering a new phase in which U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East is ever more oriented around these very deep relationships that Washington has in the Gulf.
Hassan, do you agree? And is the U.S. now seeing these Gulf countries more than sort of a source of funding and as reliable allies, a sort of reorientation of sorts?
Absolutely, Dareen. I do agree with this kind of assessment. I think the Gulf countries have become the epicenter of their politics recently over the last maybe 10 to 15 years. So we've seen Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, all rich countries willing to engage and daring and taking risk in politics in the region. And the United States wants to have allies like this. So they have the ability and they have the interest and the desire to move on in their foreign policy in a way that does not really negate the American interest in the region. But at the same time, they want to be a partner with the American. They want to realize that stability is the hallmark of the Middle East. Yes, I do agree with him.
Alon, the visit is taking place in a shifting regional landscape. Notably absent, as we've been reporting from Trump's trip, is Israel in that itinerary. You wrote a piece asking the question, should Israel be worried about Donald Trump's success in the Middle East? So I'll put that question to you. What do you think?
Well, if you ask me, no, Israel should be happy about these developments. If you ask Prime Minister Netanyahu, then he's in a wild tantrum about what's going on. And I think he's been experiencing a week-long trauma. And it all depends, Dareen, on whether or not, and I agree, obviously, with the geopolitical analysis of both Giorgio and Hassan. The question is, what are the consequences as far as Israel is concerned? There's one school of thought, which is somewhat premature, but nonetheless valid, that says, okay, there's a demotion, a marginalization of Israel here, at least in how it perceives its relations with the U.S. The focal point, shifted to Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and the UAE, and of course Qatar. But there's another way of looking at it, and that is that Trump was just fed up with Mr. Netanyahu's antics and constant manipulations, and that this is not necessarily structural. But in terms of the regional development, look, I don't want to take time from the other colleagues and friends. About 6 or 7 months ago, Dareen, there was this conventional wisdom in Israel that Israel's strategic environment improved exponentially. Iran was weakened. It lost its prized asset in Hezbollah. It lost the arms transfers conduit in Syria. Hamas was degraded. The Houthis were bombarded. And Israel was on top of the world. Well, 6 months later, particularly 3 months since Trump is president, this has been upended. All of a sudden, Israel sees itself as marginalized, thinks of itself as being relegated to lesser importance. So it really remains to be seen. Back to your question, I think this is potentially a positive development. Again,
okay.
If you ask Mr. Netanyahu, no.
Okay, let's bring in Hassan. What do you think? Is there going to be an impact on Israel because Trump just didn't visit the country? I mean, does this mean that Israel will no longer remain America's strongest ally in the region?
Well, I think, Dareen, it is not about visiting Israel. It's about changes in American, I would say, perspective vis-a-vis this part of the world. So Trump's perspective and goals are not necessarily aligned with those of Netanyahu in terms of Syria, for instance, Iran, and the Houthi. And gradually, Israel is feeling that it's being marginalized or even insulated from the what is happening in the region. There's one thing that Trump want to make sure that the United States is the one who is leading, the one who is calling the shots in this part of the world, and not Israel. So Israel should be happy, at least, for what the Americans have been doing for them. They have provided them with every single thing they need, including the ammunition to genocide the Gaza. And I think what Netanyahu wants, he wants like a complete American complicit. But I think the American agenda is way wider than the closed-minded thinking of Netanyahu and his cronies in the government.
Okay, we're going to expand on Israel and Gaza a little later, but just back to the Gulf countries now. And Giorgio, look, when Trump, during his first term in office, he visited Saudi Arabia as his first foreign trip. Now in his second term, he's visited, of course, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, as well as the UAE. So when you look at Gulf-U.S. ties and compare his first term to his second term, does anything stand out for you? And what's different this time around?
Well, yeah, I think it's important for us to recognize that the environment in the Gulf is different today compared to 8 years ago. When Trump paid his famous visit to Riyadh back in May 2017, some GCC members, really Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain, were very eager to work with a new administration that was going to take a very hawkish approach to Iran. These countries were also lobbying the Trump administration to support their collective action against Qatar. Today, it's a very different landscape. There is significant Gulf Arab unity. Not saying that all the differences between the GCC states and all the tensions have gone away, but they're really way below the surface right now. And the GCC states are in quite a bit of unity on the major regional and international issues of the day. All 6 of the GCC states favor diplomacy with Iran. There's a détente in Saudi, Iran, and UAE-Iran relations, very supportive of Trump's diplomatic efforts to reach a new nuclear deal with Iran. Also, the Gulf Arab states are looking at the Israeli normalization question differently. There's no doubt that everything that has taken place since October 7th has significantly impacted the way in which statesmen in the Gulf look at the question of normalizing with Israel. So, yeah, definitely a very different environment. And also, we should note that this Trump administration is different from the first one when it comes to U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. There is a lot less influence on the part of neoconservatives in this administration. So the picture is very, very different.
Hassan, for the Gulf countries, why is it so important for them to have strong relations with the U.S. administration?
Well, obviously, it's about their own security. They believe that the Americans can do a lot for them. I mean, we know that since 1945, the great agreement between King Abdulaziz, the late King Abdulaziz, and also Roosevelt was about energy for security. And the Americans have been fulfilling their obligations. So this part of the world is seen as within the sphere of America, so no one else can step in. So this is very important for them because it provided these countries with all the time they need in order to prosper and move on. But over the last 10 years, there was suspicion among the ruling elites in this part of the world, I mean, the Gulf, that the Americans maybe are not that committed. It started with Obama when he signed the agreement with Iran, when he talked about the pivot to the east. So they suspected that probably the United States are not really that committed. So they believe that with having this or with deepening this kind of interdependence between the Gulf and America, the United States will be more interested in their survival and their stability as well. So they have vested interest in actually in cultivating this tie with the Americans.
Alon, you have said that Trump goes where he can get something, so reciprocity is key. Is the feeling now that Israel just doesn't have anything tangible to offer the White House right now?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, not on the scale that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE can provide him with these vast pledges of investments. Not yet investments, but at least pledges, and I believe they're good for their word. Israel was never in that situation. What Israel gave the U.S. was the stability of or an ally that is stable and dependable. But Mr. Trump's understanding or definition of what an ally is or what an alliance is quite different than what we have been accustomed to in the last 80 years, since the end of World War II and the emergence of the American order. Now, there are two things that Mr. Netanyahu could have provided Trump to placate him, to make him feel good, to help him promote his agenda, and he failed on both. The first was to end the war and get a hostage/prisoner deal, which we did in January, but then Mr. Netanyahu reneged on it and violated it unilaterally in March. And that upset Mr. Trump, apparently. The second, and both gentlemen have alluded to it, is Iran. President Trump, on several occasions, repeatedly said that while he's not taking off the military option off the table, which is a cliche that every president utters, that he does prefer negotiations, that he does want a deal. And I think the Saudis, as Hassan pointed out, and also Giorgio, both the Saudis and the Emiratis, not to mention the Qataris, have been telling him negotiations is the way to go. This is not 2017, certainly not 2018, when you, President Trump, withdrew from the JCPOA. And what Mr. Netanyahu could have given Trump in the last 3 months was a toning down of the belligerent, bellicose rhetoric on Iran. Instead, and I'm sure my two colleagues here have noticed this as well as I have, instead, he fires Trump fires the national security advisor, Mike Waltz, and 2 days later, it transpires or is divulged by the White House that the reason for the dismissal was that he was running some kind of a surreptitious back channel with Netanyahu, aiming to manipulate the president to drag America into a war with Iran.
Right.
So as far as Netanyahu is concerned, he gives Trump nothing.
Giorgio, look, on this issue of Iran, and you were mentioning it also a moment ago, I mean, does this trip and the show of strength and friendship between Trump and the Gulf countries then make a war less likely between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, I think that Trump and the GCC states are really on the same page in the sense that that both sides really want to avoid a scenario in which the U.S. and Iran slide into some sort of an armed conflict, a war with each other. It needs to be stated that under such an extreme scenario, the GCC states would be on the front line. And right now, the Gulf states are really focused on their economic development and diversification. They're trying to bring in massive amounts of investment, business, tourism. They need stability within their own countries for that to happen. And that's, of course, connected to stability in the neighborhood. In the event that the U.S. or Israel would bomb Iran, we could have the Gulf destabilized in a matter of minutes. And the GCC states, I'm positive their leaders, their statesmen have been making it very clear to Trump that they're extremely concerned about the possibility of that scenario. At the same time, Trump does not want the U.S. to get bogged into some sort of a conflict in the region that becomes a huge, costly quagmire. There's no support from Trump's base or really the U.S. public for such a war with Iran. So I really think Trump and the GCC states are on the same page in terms of supporting a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear issue.
What about the Gaza situation, Hassan Barari? I mean, on Gaza, there wasn't really any major announcements. We heard the Emir of Qatar make a direct appeal to President Donald Trump to sort of solve the Gaza situation. But what we heard from Trump is that he suggested that the U.S. could take Gaza and turn it into a freedom zone. Are you surprised that we didn't hear a big announcement on Gaza?
Well, indeed, I'm not surprised. Trump is not really putting any meaningful pressure on Netanyahu when it comes to Gaza. He provided him with everything, with ammunition. Trump could have stopped the war maybe a month ago or even before. when he came up with the deal between Hamas and Israel. But on the contrary, he has been supporting Israel. I mean, the objectives of the war, like disarming Hamas and even getting rid of Hamas, I actually think that Trump has been talking about. Now, he paid a lip service to this because he wanted to appease his allies in the Gulf. He wanted to give them something, but not enough to settle the conflict in Gaza. And as you see, Dareen, people are being massacred on a daily basis. And unless the Americans step in a meaningful way, and Netanyahu would feel that he has a kind of free ride, and he would continue doing what he's been doing, and actually given also the lack of pressure from within Israel. I mean, we haven't seen like demonstrations.
But Hassan, do you think that after visiting these Arab capitals, Doha, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, do you think that Trump might end up looking at Gaza and, in fact, the whole Israel-Palestinian conflict a little bit differently, or no?
Well, absolutely, he would probably change a little bit of his position. But until this moment, we are just hearing about Steve Witkoff's proposal and initiative, which talks about a ceasefire, actually, as a quid pro quo for releasing some hostages. But no one is talking about the end of the war. By the way, the Americans have not been talking about the end of the war. They want to see the end of the war, but they say that the objectives should be realized, and this is a problem.
Alon, we were talking a moment ago about how you were suggesting that Israel has nothing to give the U.S. At this point in time. Does that apply to Jordan and Egypt as well? I mean, it was notable that the U.S. president didn't visit Jordan and Egypt as well as Tel Aviv. Jordan, Egypt, of course, being the other countries which are huge recipients of U.S. aid and traditional allies of the U.S.
Yeah, well, the key word that you just mentioned, Dareen, is traditional. And that's an anathema to Mr. Trump. He looks, I mean, with his limited, I'm sorry to be critical, his limited understanding of the Middle East and the Arab world. But he does understand that Saudi Arabia is probably the unofficial or informal leader of the Arab world right now, rather than Egypt, which assumed that part for 3, 4, 5 decades. As for Jordan, there have been successive American administrations committed to Jordan's security and stability. I'm not sure that Trump is Trump's policy or perceptions of Jordan are in line or consistent with previous administrations. I don't think he cares that much. But between Egypt and Jordan and the issue you just raised about Gaza, I think it all goes back to an important point you made in your introduction, Dareen, and that is, or somewhere along our conversation here, whether or not the U.S. is the big power broker, or whether or not the 3 Gulf states that we're talking about, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, whether or not they will shape to a large degree America's policy. If they shape America's policy, then that has a significant influence and impact on what's going to happen in Gaza, what's going to happen in the West Bank, and also how the U.S. treats Jordan and Egypt.
Okay, let's put that to Giorgio. Do you think that Trump is reshaping the Middle East, or is it these countries, the Gulf countries, that are going to be dictating U.S. foreign policy going forward?
It's a great question. I think it might take a little bit more time for us to be able to confidently say one way or the other, but there's no doubt that the GCC countries, chiefly the 3 ones which Trump just visited this week, are definitely trying to influence Trump. And I think we can say that these Gulf Arab countries, as well as Turkey, had some success probably in influencing Trump's thinking towards Syria. I have no doubt that they used their influence to move Trump toward his position in favor of lifting sanctions on Syria. We'll see how much influence they can have over the Trump administration's policies in relation to Gaza. They certainly want to succeed on that front. Time will tell to what extent they're successful. But, I think the Gulf Arab states understand Trump pretty well. They worked with him obviously for the 4 years in which he was previously in the Oval Office. They understand his transactional approach to foreign policy. They understand the way he does business. And I think that there are certain synergies between the GCC countries and Trump that are going to be playing out throughout the remainder of his second term. And I definitely do think that in certain ways, to certain extents, they will be able to influence Trump. He tends to make decisions based on the will of the highest bidder, and the Gulf Arab states can certainly play that game. And I'll just sort of wrap up this point by saying, as powerful as the pro-Israel lobby has been in the United States, we should keep in mind that the Gulf Arab states also have their lobbies in Washington too. And I think there's going to be a real clash of agendas between some of the Gulf lobbies in Washington and the pro-Israel lobby in Washington. And I think in some ways, the Gulf Arab lobbies might come out on top when it comes to influencing the Trump administration. I would say that probably at this point in Trump's second term, we are already seeing that to some extent, or to some real, some real results so far.
Let me bring in Hassan. Hassan, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I agree with George that, Trump is driven by his own transactional agenda in this part of the world. But I think when it comes to the lobbies, I don't see that there is a Gulf lobby. There are lobbies, as you said, and they are not really united in terms of what they want to achieve. So they don't really coordinate. And sometimes we feel that they are in competition. And some of them are in alliance with the Israel lobby. And this is the sad story. Is that how the Arabs can manipulate American politics from within in order to manipulate the American foreign policy vis-a-vis the key issues here, mainly the Palestinian issue. We haven't seen this. I mean, we know that Yusuf al-Atabi, for instance, he's the leading lobbyist in America for the Emiratis. He came with a statement that really don't ally with those who want to end the war in a way that benefits the Palestinians and stop the massacres. So I think it's really early to say whether this is going to make a kind of a revolution in American foreign policy toward this part of the world. But what I am sure about is that there's a kind of interdependence now between the Americans and the Gulf states. It's no more that the Americans can dictate everything on the Gulf.
Alon, a final word to you.
The Donald Trump is impulsive, erratic, unpredictable, unexpectable, and with a very short and very narrow attention span. So this entire learned analysis, at least on the part of Hassan and Giorgio, forget me, could all be proven either wrong or go to it in a different direction 6-7 months down the road. This is Trump as a person, as a political person, and what we think we understand about his agenda will always, by definition, lack consistency and depth. So while he did put in motion or set in motion major tectonic shifts, even in the Middle East, we don't know that he's going to follow through and make them permanent in, say, a 6 to 12 months period.
Okay, we will leave it there on that note. Thank you to all my guests for joining us, Giorgio Cafiero, Hassan Barari, and Alon Pinkas. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story from myself and the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.